Well, hello and welcome to another Diving Deeper from Longfleet Baptist Church. My name's Ken, I'm the minister here, and I'm joined again by my wife Nicky. And the reason you're getting Nicky 2 weeks in a row is because the theme of Pentecost was something that Nicky had been thinking about, the themes that I sort of picked up on. And we did it slightly differently on Pentecost Sunday, in that I did 3 shorter talks rather than one longer sermon. And we looked at Exodus 19, where Moses is on Mount Sinai. And we then looked at 2 Chronicles 7, where Solomon had dedicated the temple. And then, of course, we looked at Acts 2, the day of Pentecost. And we pulled out some similarities and differences between these 3 different accounts in the Bible. So in Exodus 19, Mount Sinai was covered in a fire. In 2 Chronicles 7, the temple was filled with fire. And on Pentecost, fire fell on the disciples. So what does the fire represent in these accounts?
These all themes of God breaking out has been really significant for me. I've been looking at this for about a year or more, and for me it was the fire was representing His presence, I think, as well as the temple that Solomon built. I think is really about the holiness of God, sort of encapsulating and being present, but in a confined kind of space. He didn't break out quite so much, but we have sort of Acts and we have the Sinai experience where there was this danger of breaking out amongst the people. And I think the presence of God is so significant that a human can't appreciate it. And I think that was why in the Sinai experience and the Pentecost experience, you have this dangerous breaking out. Whereas when you had everyone in the right position, everyone was positioned for God in when the temple was built and Solomon had dedicated everything and he'd followed everything that was commanded of him to do, and it was as if his presence could be appreciated for what it was, and it sort of remained, even though it was dangerous, it was still, his presence was there. So that's my take on it. I wonder what your thoughts are.
So the fire to me represents the holiness of God. It's, we can't comprehend that, and in a way the fire is God kind of showing us as close to what we can imagine as what we can appreciate God's holiness is like. And certainly in the temple account, the fire falls in the temple and it consumes all the offerings and all the sacrifices. And there's something there about cleansing and purifying. So God cleanses that space and He purifies that space. So there's something about the holiness of God, the fire of God, which cleanses and purifies us and these holy spaces. But it's also dangerous. The holiness of God is dangerous. In Exodus 19, God says to Moses, "Tell the people not to break through, lest I break out." So if the fire of God breaks out, the holiness of God breaks out, there's a danger there. And we kind of think of God as, sometimes us Christians get God a bit soft and squishy and lovey-dovey. Yes, He is, but He's still a holy God. And there is a real danger there of that holiness, and if we approach that holiness wrong. And you're right that the temple, Solomon had got it right and the priest had got it right, but they still weren't allowed in when the holy fire was there. They still, it says even the priests couldn't go in.
Back, didn't they?
They still had to, so there was that barrier. And there's something there in Exodus and 2 Chronicles about this barrier between God and humanity. And I spoke about that quite a bit this morning in these talks. There is a barrier between God's holiness and us that God warns humans not to break through that. You mustn't break through that barrier. So that fire is God's holiness, and it's dangerous, but it's also cleansing and purifying. And obviously fire, our ancestors, you had to have fire. If you didn't have fire, you couldn't survive. In Iron Age Palestine or wandering the deserts of Egypt, you had to have fire to ward off animals, to cook your food. So there's something, it's dangerous, but you need it.
And one of the other things I literally just thought of, there's also the calling of fire, like in Isaiah, I think Isaiah sets up the temple. You have a competition with the prophets of Baal, the God who answers by fire, the God who's called down and answers by fire. And I think that was a really interesting parallel as well. God speaks in the burning bush, and Kim talked about that this morning. So it's about the God who speaks through the fire, and when you call him, he comes in fire. And there's something about a name, isn't there? It's very significant. It's something about the one who's called, and if he's sort of marked by that fire, which I think is really interesting as well.
So, as I said, in Exodus 19, we spoke about where the Israelites, were warned not to break through the barrier between God and humans, and Yahweh actually gets quite upset about it with Moses. Moses says, "We all understand." Then he said, "Yeah, but do you really go down the mountain and tell them, because I want to be absolutely certain, the people not to break through." And he says, you mustn't break through the barrier lest I break out. And two different words, break through and break out. But then I said that Jesus did break through that barrier and did allow God to break out. So in what way did Jesus break through that barrier between humans and God and allow God to break out in a way that we could cope with, that didn't burn us all up and destroy us?
I think the word for not burning us up and destroying us, I remember something my aunt used to say, and that reminds me of his grace is what enables us to be standing in the presence of God like a light bulb that can't blow a fuse. And it's literally that amount of energy, but without, being so overwhelmed that it would break you. And that's the grace of God. I think the biggest kind of symbol of all this is obviously the holiest place, isn't it? The Holy of Holies, where wasn't that divided by the curtain, which obviously when he died was torn in two, which was significant and symbolic of Jesus, paving the way for people to enter that Holy of Holies and be closer to God than there had been in the past. That's the one main thing that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I mean, nothing we can do can make us holy enough to be in God's presence, but Jesus' death made us holy. And I'm reminded of the passage later on in Acts where Peter sees the vision of animals, and God says, get up, Peter, kill and eat. And he said, "Never, Lord, I'll never eat anything that's unclean." And God says to him, "Don't call anything unclean which I have made clean." And I interpret that to mean that God has made everything clean. We've been cleansed by the death of Christ, by the blood of Christ, by that sacrifice of Christ. We're not holy in and of ourselves, but Jesus has made us holy, and that's what allows us to cross that barrier to God's holiness.
Not safely though, is it? Not all the time.
Not really safe, no. And I was going to, next question is, can you think of biblical examples of God breaking out, good or bad? And very quickly in Acts, we get the story of Ananias and Sapphira who lie to the Apostle Peter and fall down dead. They claim they've sold a piece of land and they claim to have given all the money to the church, and they haven't, they've kept some back. So that's not the problem. Keeping back a bit of money, that was fine if they wanted to do that, but lying about it and testing the Spirit in that way, lying to the Spirit. So there's still a danger there. And then again a bit later in Acts we get Herod Agrippa, where he's giving a speech and the people proclaim him to be a god, and he doesn't deny it, he accepts it, and then he's struck down dead by the Spirit as well. And we know historically that he did die quite suddenly of abdominal pain. So it's still dangerous. The Spirit of God is still dangerous. The holiness of God is still dangerous when God breaks out.
There's a verse, isn't there? The fool says in his heart there is no God, and any person is foolish to think that they are God or that there is no God. Either way, you are at risk of God breaking out against you, I guess. I think when we were talking about breaking out and other examples, you'd only just recently spoken on the fishermen and how their nets were so full they broke. And I think, you know, just got Jesus is standing there, and suddenly, you know, there's the nets are so full they you know, they're breaking. And I think, you know, that's that must be quite dangerous on a boat to have so much weight that you can't actually tow it in.
Yeah.
So there's this danger of abundance, as well as, you know, the risk of death in that moment of, you know, God's blessing pouring out but not being able to contain it.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's a dangerous prayer, isn't it? Are we really ready for God to break out amongst us? Is that something we actually want? And I think that's something we have to wrestle with. Do you really know what that is?
Yeah.
Because I think most of us, if we were to put our hand on our heart, do we really know? And are we going to be able to ask that prayer of God to give us the blessings, to help us walk in faith and light and love, and do the things in say, for example, the Beatitudes? Can we really say, are we hungering and thirsting for righteousness? Because we will see him break out for his name's sake. And that's a dangerous prayer to make.
And not only dangerous, but we see in Pentecost in Acts that this breakout of God, the breaking out of the Spirit, is confusing to those people that don't get it. You know, it says they all ask, what does this mean? All were amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, what does this mean? But others sneered and said they are filled with wine. So it confuses people, and people look at us and think we're completely insane. They look at us Christians and think these guys are mad. And so you've got a scary, risky element of the breakout of God. You've got the confusing, perplexing element of the breakout. You've got the people being ridiculed when God breaks out. So, you know, like you say, do we really want God to break out among us? Because what's that gonna look like?
I mean, you have to be prepared to put your life on the line. I mean, I go back to experience a few years ago, and I know that most people will know that I had a dream about running the project that I currently do. And I had no idea of the sacrifice that would be involved. But people do think that I'm absolutely crazy, you know, not taking earnings, not having a set job. It's a very westernized focus that we're currently trapped in. And it's like, actually, if you have the Holy Spirit on you, the mark is give it up. There is no other way to live that life. You have to just walk in faith. And people don't understand it. They do find it weird. They find it confusing. Yeah. But that is the only way to recognize God breaking out and working in your life, is to lay everything that you thought you knew down. And the same with Ananias and Sapphira, you know, not being able to be completely honest or upfront and lay it down was actually extremely dangerous at the time that God was acting in that moment. Yeah. Are we ready for that Acts moment again? Because you can't have people sort of struck down in front of you, but are we hungering and thirsting for that to happen?
And then I said that Pentecost was a new Sinai. So Sinai, the giving of the law to the Israelites, Moses comes down off the mountain, having conversed with God, gives them the law, gives them the 10 Commandments. And this is about almost like the beginning of the nation of Israel, the holy nation of Israel, is when they become Yahweh's, when he gives them the law. And I argue that Pentecost is the new Sinai for Christians. That it's so similar. So Peter has been conversing with God in the person of Jesus, and Peter then presents this new law, these new commandments, and he stands up at Pentecost and he explains what's going on, and he relates it to the Old Testament prophecies of the Spirit. And so, do you agree? Do you think that Pentecost is a new Sinai in that way?
Well, you know, God wrote his commandments in stone. It's saying, you know, I'll write them on hearts, and it's almost like that was the start of it, wasn't it? You know, writing his commandments like instead of stone, but on human hearts. You know, he will cause people to have morality in their hearts, to think about issues, to weigh up and judge and decide, but under his authority. And so, yes, it is a kind of new Sinai, I guess. I think it was a really interesting parallel to see those two side by side, because I was looking at it from like the Chronicles and I started this whole journey really by looking at Ezekiel and the Spirit leaving rather than it descending, and then it led me to the Pentecost, and then Pentecost took me back to, you know, the breaking out in Sinai, but I hadn't really connected the two quite as closely as that, and I think that was really profound actually, because I'd not heard it before. So yes, I would assume that would be when God said, I'll write my new laws on their hearts.
Yeah.
That would be the same as writing it in stone.
Yeah.
You know, back where in for Moses.
Well, they say that Pentecost is the birthday of the church, and I've done a school assembly where I have a sort of birthday celebration for Pentecost. I say this is the birthday of the church, and so in the way that the giving of the law and the Ten Commandments was the birth of Israel, the Pentecost is the birth of the new Israel, or people don't like it when I use that sort of language, but the continuation, the church is the continuation of this nation of Israel, and Pentecost was the day that marked the fresh, the fresh kind of expression of God's people in the church, including the Gentiles in that. So yeah, I definitely equate Pentecost with Sinai, and the Hebrew celebration of Shavuot celebrates the giving of the law. That's what Pentecost is. It's the giving of the law. And so this happening on the day of Pentecost, you know, the Spirit falling on the day of Pentecost is pretty significant.
Yeah.
You know, Christ is crucified on Passover because he's our Passover sacrifice. The Spirit falls on Shavuot because it's the giving of the law. It's that. So
amazing.
Yeah, we could talk for ages on this, and
I really think it's a fascinating issue.
Do, if you get a chance, listen to the little talks that I gave, and I'll load them up onto our website, and you'll see the Exodus and 2 Chronicles and Acts, and how those three events all relate to each other.
Maybe also a little challenge would be to see if you can find any other verses to do with breaking out, because there are quite a few other parallels to this which I've found since this word has come to light.
So get your concordance out, or ask Google
or speak to me later.
Where this word break out, where God breaks out, because it's quite often. So he warns humans mustn't break through in case he breaks out, and there are occasions where he breaks out, and most obviously there at Pentecost when the Spirit broke out amongst his church.
And also it'd be different for Hebrew and Greek, so just a note there.
Yeah. So do hope that you know the presence of the Spirit in your life, and that you will know that Jesus has broken through that barrier between you and God, and enables God to break out in your life, to break forth in your life. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe, give us a like, check out our website longfleetbaptistchurch.co.uk, and you'll find all details of our church services, our Bible studies, our other activities, all the things that go on in our church, and we'll see you soon for another Diving Deeper. Thanks, Nicky.
That's right, thank you.